Thank you for tuning in to the Regulatory and Guidance Update video series. I'm Sarah Stout, the Program Development Manager here at NAFI. This month we're covering MOSAIC in 3 different videos. This is the second video in the series. I'm rejoined by Samantha Boyer, and our discussion focuses on the changes for flight instructors. For more context, be sure to watch the first video in this series that is an overview of the final rule and changes for sport pilots. There's a link in the video description. Video 3 is a detailed overview of the new aircraft certification rules, and there's also a link in the video description. NAFI memberships are what make this content possible. If you aren't already a NAFI member, you can join us today at nafimentor.org. Use code REG-SAVE5, REG SAVE5 to save $5 on your new NAFI membership.
On to MOSAIC for flight instructors. The flight instructor content in the final rule is kind of scattered throughout it as it talks about different privileges. One thing we have to kind of denote here at the beginning of this discussion is in the FAA's eyes, there's 2 different flavors of flight instructor.
Right.
There's your Subpart H flight instructor and your Subpart K flight instructor. So your Subpart K flight instructor is your flight instructor with a sport pilot rating, and H is your flight instructor without a sport pilot rating. We also hear them called like regular flight instructors. I can't say I love that term, but you hear it. I'm a Subpart H flight instructor.
Me too.
Subpart K didn't exist when I got my CFI.
Right.
All right, let's jump in because there are some differences in and opportunity within the light sport training world for Subpart K and Subpart H flight instructors. One of the big questions NAFI's been getting is, hey, I'm a light sport instructor. What am I going to be able to do? What am I not going to be able to do? How is this changing for me? So let's go ahead and let's start with our Subpart K flight instructors, because remember, Subpart H flight instructors have all those same privileges already. But what's changing for your Subpart K instructors, as we mentioned in the segment on MOSAIC for sport pilots, you're now limited to carrying 1 person instead of 1 passenger.
Right.
And that was a result of that final rule last fall that changed that passenger definition. And the NPRM actually proposed 1 passenger, and then that rule changed in the middle of the process. I think comments had already closed and everything, and they were doing that. So this was a change the FAA had to make after the fact. There's really no room for debate on this. It's a pretty straightforward definition. You can carry 1 person. Your pilots you're training can carry 1 passenger. Well, now sport pilots have the option of these manual controllable pitch propellers. They have retractable landing gear, complex high performance aircraft. How do I teach in those? Pretty straightforward. You get all the same training and endorsement that your pilot has too. and then you can instruct in those airplanes. And you may have that if you're a private or a commercial pilot who happens to fly these aircraft. So I certainly know of some pilots who are private pilots, fly larger aircraft on their own, and are sport instructors because that's all they wanted to do. So you may already be there, but it's pretty straightforward. Thankfully, there's no additional hoops or anything for flight instructors. Simply get the same training and endorsement. My personal spidey senses are to get a little experience. Don't get your sign off and then hop in with a student. Maybe take her around the patch a few times on your own.
Yeah. Make sure that you're comfortable in what you're teaching before, you shouldn't be learning it with your student, right?
Right. Yeah. Go on that $100 hamburger run. Or I forget. We're probably up to $300 now, but go out there and get at least some measure of your own experience in these aircraft, because the training to get you the endorsement, it's good. You'll get there, but again, that's an operating privilege, and you'll have the privilege to teach, but a bit more experience won't hurt.
And too, teaching new equipment to a student, you not only need to have your own skill set, but you need to start talking to other instructors about what are the common mistakes that the students are going to make, especially with the retractable landing gear. I can't tell you how many times I've had students where they've called 3 green, no red. I've told them to go around, and on the miss, they're on the go around, they go to retract their gear and realize it's already up. Like, you need to be ready to catch those mistakes. And if that's not something that you've kind of, and I'm going to go to your regular CFI, your Subpart H flight instructor training, that's a big part of our training, is how to catch those mistakes. And you really do want to make sure that you're prepared to do that, not only for the safety of your student, but for your own safety.
And you might need to find an older instructor for that, because now with the 2016 rule change, you can go all the way on the single engine side and never swing gear. You might, if you're going to start doing this, need to go find an instructor who's done this and
who's got a little gray hair.
Yeah, I don't point those out, but yeah, but I mean, easily since 2016. So we're 9 years now that you could easily have flight instructors who, aside from their multi-rating, assuming they got it, have never swung gear.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what kind of challenge that poses.
So yeah, and that's where definitely getting your own experience with it could help as well. We'll see what happens with the light sport market if any aircraft come out with that. And then same thing, controllable pitch propeller, any of those, go get some experience, go get a variety of experience, are all good stuff.
Absolutely.
The night requirements. Yeah. So this is just that same training and endorsement. Subpart K flight instructors are going to have to start with getting this training from Subpart H flight instructors. So you are going to have to specifically seek out flight instructors without a sport pilot rating. That's the only group of instructors qualified to do this right now. And then once that initial group of Subpart K instructors gets that endorsement, then they can start training other Subpart K instructors as well as sport pilots and rising sport pilot applicants.
Right.
Now, night training won't be a requirement for that initial certificate, but you certainly could do it at the same time. So that, again, is pretty straightforward, but you are going to have to make a specific effort to go find that training, but it should be pretty readily available. It's no different than the flight training going on for anything else.
Well, and I don't know when this video is coming out, but let's make sure that we're not getting those endorsements before the final rule is effective.
Correct. Yeah. All of this becomes effective October 22nd, 2020.
And any previous experience counts. So get all of the experience in the world that you want. That's never going to go away. That's always going to be valid. But realize that you can't actually utilize this and put this into practice until October 22nd. Maybe they were trying to make sure that we were outside of all the daylight savings time and we had more night time to utilize.
More night available. Yeah.
Exactly.
Daylight savings will be a couple weeks after that in November. One thing to note is that these night endorsements are category and class specific. If you have your night endorsement for airplane single engine land, you're not qualified at night for single engine sea or rotorcraft. Let's move on to these aircraft with simplified flight controls.
Okay.
So where are these flight instructors going to come from is another interesting discussion. And the rule does address this very specifically. And it says, hey, we know that these don't exist right now, and so they have to come from somewhere. So where the FAA is going to source these are Subpart H instructors employed or authorized by the aircraft manufacturer. That means at least the initial opportunity for this is limited to those Subpart H instructors. Now, once they get their endorsement or authorization or whatever that looks like from the manufacturer, they can pretty much immediately go out and start training the Subpart K instructors, and then so on down the line from there. But it is going to take some time. And also keep in mind that the airworthiness rules that'll even allow these aircraft with simplified flight controls to be designated and manufactured don't even go into effect until the end of July 2026. We have a while until we're even going to see this, but that opportunity for that initial group is limited to Subpart H instructors. Hopefully we'll see that when it does happen. Spread pretty quickly. Obviously it's in the manufacturer's interest to have people authorized to fly their aircraft. That's how they sell them. Hopefully we'll see robust training opportunities available for that. That's just going to be market driven at the time.
Yeah, and there was a lot of manufacturers that were a part of a lot of these committees with giving feedback and stuff like that. So obviously they have a vested interest in this. But like you said, this is definitely going to be something that's going to take time, because not only do we have to have the final rule in play and active, but then they actually have to build the aircraft and get them all, and they have to be in line with all that. So that's going to take time, and then they have to train the pilots, and So I mean, this is probably something we've got another, I would say easily 2 years before we see this more than a 1 to 2 off situation.
I don't think like the consensus standards even exist at this point, and we're recording in September 2025.
Yeah,
So
I think they're still being
they've
edited.
yeah, so they've got time, they've got to put all that together. So they can't. I mean, they can probably maybe loosely start designing something or have some ideas going, but until they have those standards, it's probably not in their interest to put a whole lot of work into it. And then, like I said, by the time you actually manufacture and assess your market and train and all that, July of next year is the earliest available date, not necessarily the earliest realistic date. I would lean towards you. We've got a good couple years till we see these, at your neighborhood airport, but there will be a regulatory option and we will see them. That pretty much wraps up the content that is unique to Subpart K flight instructors out of this rule. There is one unique thing for Subpart H. So flight instructors without that sport pilot rating, 61-195 is being revised to require that flight instructors take their initial flight instructor practical test in an aircraft with conventional controls as a prerequisite to instruct an aircraft with simplified controls. Which to me sounded a little bit convoluted at first. I had to read this a couple times. I'm like, well, the flight instructor, the simplified flight controls are make model specific. What's the deal? Like, well, it's because these aircraft are unique. They're going to be light sport aircraft. They're not going to be in the standard categories and things like that. So you won't actually be a Subpart H flight instructor if you were only teaching in those. You'd be Subpart K. So that would make sense with these, helicopters that may be forthcoming with simplified flight controls. You would need to be a Subpart H rotorcraft helicopter flight instructor, having passed that initial test in a helicopter with conventional controls. And this may go on to other types of aircraft, but for now, they're focusing on helicopters in particular. So Subpart H, you're still flying your conventional flight controls for your initial practical test. All right. And then there was a bit that touches all instructors. And so this, again, like we said with the pilots, if they're going to get additional privileges as an add-on rating in airplane or helicopter, they will need to pass that practical test. So instead of just the proficiency check, so that same logic of just the range of the aircraft you can operate now as a flight instructor and as a Subpart K instructor, that will now all need to be a practical test. What I did find was interesting was that 6163, so the requirements for additional certificates or ratings, isn't changing as a result of this particular provision. The FAA viewed that sport pilots are issued privileges to operate different categories and classes, not ratings. Because you're issued a flight instructor with a sport pilot rating, and then all of these other things are endorsements and privileges. That's one thing to not get tripped up on, because I can see some examiners having a good time with that too. Well, 6163, where all of this is, especially if you're a Subpart H flight instructor and that's the regulation you've worked with a lot, doesn't say I need a practical test to add on, helicopter or whatever at the sport pilot level. But it will be in 61-419 is the reference I have jotted down here.
Yep.
So be aware of that. I thought that was an interesting note there. So you're not going to find that in 61-63. It's only going to be in the Subpart K instructor information. Right. One other big change that this rule brings in that I was really excited to see is the opportunity for sport pilot training to include up to 2.5 hours of training credit in an FSTD, so a flight simulation training device, or an ATD, an aviation training device representing the appropriate category and class of aircraft. So that was a nice change because currently sport pilots can't use any type of simulation towards their hours requirements, whereas like pretty much every other rating can. I'm not sure about some of the less common ones, but certainly when you're into airplane, rotorcraft, the more prevalent aircraft categories, simulations become more prevalent. And the FAA even discussed in the final rule how they have become more flexible and accepting of simulation for things like training, proficiency, recency as this technology has grown and advanced. And so it was a good opportunity with all of that data from those other training scenarios to bring that in to the sport pilot realm. And they even discussed, like you said, how this has all been very data driven, like how the percentage of training required for sport pilot, this 2.5 hours, is roughly that same percentage as what's allowed for private and other types of ratings. So it is very data driven. This wasn't just, 2.5 sounds good.
Which drives me crazy. I hate that. And I've gotten that answer, right? That's the same thing as, well, that's what my flight instructor told me. I tell my students, you're never allowed to, that's never the right answer. Yeah, this is an exciting one. And it's funny because like you get students who have very mixed feelings about simulation, right?
Mhm.
A lot of students get, well, it's not like the airplane. Nope, it's not. Accept that. Be okay with that. Remember, the purpose of a simulator is, one, to help you with procedures. And once you have the procedures down, you can actually practice the skills and use that time of skill training and that practice a lot more fruitfully. It's a lot more valuable. You're getting more bang for your buck when you have that procedural skill down. So this is huge. In all honesty, you should probably be doing a lot more than 2.5 in a home simulation to just run through procedures. But like you said, it's going to be challenging to find sims that have appropriate aircraft, but it's huge. The other big thing about this is it allows us to put students in scenarios I wouldn't do in an actual aircraft.
Right. That's what I was going to say when you were talking about procedures. But yeah, procedures, absolutely. And also emergencies. Because, there's a whole lot I'm willing to do to you in a sim that we're not going to do in an airplane. And you can do it so much more realistically. You can step down that oil temperature. You can,
Exactly.
creep up, amps or something. You can do all this very subtly. And you don't have a way to do that in the airplane. And even if you did, that'd be wildly unsafe.
Right.
That's the reason why you can't. But to be able to do all this in the sim and teach them those lessons of like, hey, I know we spend a lot of time looking out the window and that, but like, you do have to check that oil temperature gauge every once in a while. Like, it's not just decoration. And so to kind of build, like I said, those scenarios and that overall situational awareness and that balance of outside, inside, and what do you look at and when, and on top of baking in those procedures, and you can do all that while practicing going into airspace and all of that, where if you were to try to do that in real life, even, something very minor, if they got distracted and now ATC's got something or there's other traffic, all of those concerns just go away in the sim, and you can really hammer in on those lessons very efficiently too, because you don't have to take off or every single time. You can just reset where you are and say, okay, now let's try it with this variable different, things like that.
Right.
So this is great. Now, one thing, these types of devices that are allowed, these FSTDs are only allowed in 141 or 142 programs, as well as some higher level commercial operator type programs. So at least for the moment, I would be floored if we find any type of sport pilot training in those. But ATDs are very prevalent and easy to come by in the flight training world. However, they are subject to their FAA letter of authorization. So until those are updated to specifically include this regulation for sport pilot, I'd absolutely still encourage using those devices for the types of training we suggested, but know that until that LOA is reissued, including this regulation, that time can't actually be used towards your training credit.
And if you're a school that has those, you're going to need to go talk to that company that you bought it from and ask for that.
These LOAs are issued to the device manufacturer. They are not issued to the flight school. It is the manufacturer's responsibility to make sure that they are available to the flight school. And these are on a timeline too. They expire. So just because you got one when you purchased your device doesn't mean it's forever. They do have a shelf life. So it's the school or the operator's responsibility to ensure that their LOA is up to date and available to the person using it. And usually the manufacturers have these just on their website that you can go download. They're typically not like specific to your device. It's this whole, model of devices is what they are, sometimes even collective models for some of the larger manufacturers. So this is not difficult information to find. You just have to make the attempt to go do it. And the manufacturers are probably going to have to work with the FAA a bit initially to get this regulation added on there. And hopefully that's an easy process. This training, especially when we're talking like airplane single engine and some of these very common things, you're doing the same thing. It doesn't matter if you're training a sport pilot to do emergencies in a 172 or a private pilot. That engine's going to fail exactly the same way. That's an exciting thing. I'm excited to see that become more prevalent and have that opportunity available to sport pilots in aircraft that are representative of what they're actually operating.
Right.
All right, our last thing here in our flight instructor segment is examiners. With those simplified flight controls, they have to come up with parameters for all of these. For examiners who are going to be doing practical tests, either for an initial pilot or add-on in an aircraft with these simplified flight controls, those examiners are going to have to hold the appropriate category, class, rating, or privilege for that and have the ability to assume control of the aircraft. So that's going to have to be another thing that these aircraft manufacturers are going to have to think about. Right now, we see a lot of fully functioning dual controls or, parameters around aircraft that don't have that. Well, so what do these simplified controls look like? Is this like a screen in the middle? Is this a screen on each side that whereas right. Where they can put it in exam mode? So, this one's the master. If the student does something, the examiner, knows they can do it on their screen and the aircraft's going to follow theirs. Is it a toggle switch that this one's now the primary and that's the secondary?
And what happens if you accidentally hit it? Hopefully they put cases over them. Oh my
right,
goodness.
Yeah. Protected switches or something like that. And, that'll have to be a pre-flight item. So you make sure, or, whether it's that or if it's some password protected thing in the system, who knows? But that'll have to be a thing that they're going to have to consider and that pilots are going to have to look at when they get in the aircraft and examiners and know. This is bringing back kind of the trauma of, forgetting to push that VLOC button.
Well, and then this is going to be another, that's funny.
Make sure those needles are the right color.
This is going to be another one of those too. So are we going to have the instructors that have been authorized from the manufacturers and they're going to go train the DPEs?
Are the manufacturers going to require that the instructors that they hire be DPEs or be qualified to be examiners and get them through?
I don't know how that loop is going to work quite yet.
Yeah, because I've seen examiners not even want to do tests in light sport aircraft, even common airplane single engine because they didn't have experience in that particular make and model, which fair enough. I fully support their decision in that, but now we're talking like a whole other species of aircraft here. And that they will not have any transferable experience to really speak about.
We're going to see who the brave souls of the DP world are.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all if there's some out there and that's who these manufacturers hire.
Right.
But we'll find out. Again, this is probably at least 2 years down the road. And, they've got to get all the capital and figure out their market and figure out what these consensus standards are and how to comply and how to be able to do this so that the pilot examiner can take control and all that. So
interesting.
It will be. Sam, thanks so much for coming on and for all your work that you do for NAFI and representing us on this committee. You've done a fantastic job and we really appreciate all your work because we should note that this is all volunteer.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, I enjoy it. It's good. And I'm sure my committee's also sick of me being like, okay, but where's the data? Let's look at the data. So I'm sure they'll be ready for a break from that soon.
Well, this was a very data-driven final rule, so hopefully your heart was happy with all 700 and something pages of the document you read. But yeah, I was impressed with how much was baked into this, even down to those, well, this is the percentage of, we allow for the simulation thing and things like that. So
yes.
All right. Well, stay tuned to NAFI for more MOSAIC stuff as questions come up. I'm sure there will be more. I'm sure things will crawl out of the woodwork as this goes into effect. And we'll stay up to date as we learn more. All right. Thanks, Sam. We'll see ya.
Thanks, Sarah.